grew up in care. He was taken into care when he was about 6 months old, along with his brothers and sisters. And when he left care in Birmingham, he didn't have anywhere to go, and he slept rough for 2 years. He was homeless as a really young man. And his sister, that came out of care at the same time, was in a similar situation. My dad was discovered sleeping in a barn by a farmer, and the farmer helped him. He helped him find somewhere to live. He helped him get a place in a hostel and find a job, and he thrived. His sister met someone who wasn't as helpful. She had children. She ended up in prison. My cousins were taken into care. They had a really, really tough time with it. They grew up in Hammersmith, so as young black men, they experienced terrible prejudice and racism within the community at the time. So that's part of my family. That's my family, and I was always very aware when I was growing up about the inequality and the injustice in those two stories of my dad and his sister Jo. And although I grew up not in a financially privileged situation, I grew up in a family that was safe, with love and with care and comfort. So I'm really aware of the disparity between my life and my cousin's life at the time, even though I didn't know them until I was a little bit older, and my dad's story and his sister's story. So he left care and he was helped, and he was heard, and someone listened to him. His sister left and she wasn't heard at all. And being heard is really important, and it feeds into the work we do here. It's to be able to be heard, to hear someone and to act positively in support. So in the last 10 years of my career, I spent curating exhibitions, contemporary art exhibitions, and developing collection galleries in Derby museums. And they've always been, in the last couple of years, projects that have involved thousands of people. So it's very much co-curating, co-producing, involving people, doing something extraordinary together. People from lots of different backgrounds are involved, offering people agency in those cultural spaces when perhaps they wouldn't usually have had that kind of agency and involvement. And it's very much been about bringing people together to do things together, as opposed to segregating and separating out groups of people and treating them differently accordingly. So it was only when I began to work here about 11 months ago that part of my personal family history suddenly began to shout and felt like it was really important in this environment. I don't know about courts and justice and law and crime and punishment. We're learning a lot. We're both learning a lot since we've been here, but I know about involving people and creative co-production. People that come to the Justice Museum are treated really well. Visitors have a really great experience. We found when we started here and started to talk to the team and talk to visitors and talk to people out in the city, that people that aren't visiting haven't necessarily been considered at all. And that's because we've been operating as a visitor attraction, and the Contemporary Museum is way more than a visitor attraction. It's a place of activism and involvement. So the historic stories of the collection are interpreted and shared really well, but there's some interesting gaps that make this collection and this brilliant evocative building that's really authentic, relevant to people's lives today, that enables people to be involved in what happens in this museum and back out in the city. So our time here has been about developing new ways to include people, developing exhibitions way more openly, introducing things like experimental ideation processes where lots of people get involved at the very, very beginning of the conversation as opposed to near the end of the project. It's about including better connecting with, better reflecting, better representing the people of the city and the UK, because we're a national collection. We've tried to encourage people to focus on mutual respect and equity, involving people that aren't currently in the room, so that the projects aren't through the same lens, developed through the same lens time and time again. And definitely doing it with people rather than to people. There's a subtle difference. The other thing I want to say is that people that don't visit the museum aren't hard to reach. It's a really disrespectful museum term that's used, that they're hard to reach people. We're hard to reach. People aren't. People are fine, going about their everyday life quite happily, thank you very much. We're hard to reach, and it's our responsibility to better connect with people and nurture those relationships, to be an ally, to amplify people's voices where they're perhaps not being heard. It's really important that those voices of people from all backgrounds are included in the way that we programme, that we exhibit, we display, we interpret the collections. There's lots of people within the city whose story isn't generously represented here right now, particularly, or for example, people affected by prison, people living in prison. We have these amazing objects that people living in prison have crafted. They're gorgeous, they're interesting, they're full of ingenuity and intelligence and cleverness. So we need to be speaking with people that are in those scenarios now to get a multifaceted perspective on those objects, otherwise we're only telling part of the story. So what Simon and I have introduced with the team is free Friday morning creative sessions where we're working with really incredible talented artists. This is a paid venue, and that's a barrier in itself to some people. So we're looking at developing free spaces. So in the heart of the city, there's somewhere that people can come. They can have generous access to a collection that's currently in store. They can respond creatively, learn a new skill, and those conversations that happen in the space then shape and feed the exhibition process. Bringing people together and talking with people that perhaps feel isolated has been really interesting, and how we might use these quite intimidating spaces for hope and joyful activity, because the collection is pretty tricky to work with. We've developed a project lab, and again another free space where we can be more provocative using people's resources, where people can encounter someone that they might not normally encounter in their everyday life. It's a way to challenge our assumptions, which we should always be doing. And what happens in that room again shapes and informs the programme going forward. It enables us to be more fleet of foot and activist and react to current news events too. So Brexit, there's nothing in the museum talking about whether politicians are currently breaking the law, and how people feel about that, and what we should be saying about that. As museums aren't neutral. We should be reacting to events that are happening right now, because they're the things that are relevant to people's lives. So that project lab enables us to be much more flexible than it would be if we needed to reinterpret the main collection. You can't do that quickly. It's like a massive tanker turning around, but we can be a bit more speedboaty in the project lab. We're also taking objects out to where people are in the city, which has been really interesting and great fun. In fact, Michael, we're doing a walk with Palm Jeep, who's not here this evening. So ways of connecting people with the objects as a stimulus. They're installed, they're cared for, but they're not being used to their full capacity. So we're taking objects out onto the street, we've been at events in and around the city, and then we're testing and trialling and experimenting. And some things haven't worked, and that's fine, because that's what happens when you experiment. And some things have been incredibly valuable, so that we can be more strategic in our second year to programme where we go, who wants to be involved, and keep those relationships rolling. So this work that we're embarking upon evolves iteratively and kindly, and can change direction in response to the way that people are engaging with us. But very much is about opening up the museological process and making this collection, these brilliant spaces, much more accessible. So our provocation is a how might we question. We ask lots of how might we questions as opposed to what can we, because how is a creative confidence provider, and how assumes that there are solutions out there. Might implies that failure is okay, because we learn from failure. We can put ideas out there. How might we? And we, obviously, we're in this together in whatever scenario we're exploring. How might we? So our provocation is how might we, I need to read it, it's a long one. How might we ensure the Justice Museum better reflects, includes and represents people of the city from all backgrounds in the stories and activities that are shared